So what we have coming up, the remainder of the hour, in fact, Steve Millington will be here. Steve is going to be joining us in the last half hour of the first hour of the program, as he does on Tuesday mornings. We'll be talking a bit about the ever-growing field of candidates for the Republican Party nomination for president, perhaps about the Patriot Act a little bit too as well. Right now we're up to nearly 10, I think, announced candidates, with Lindsey Graham, who has a snowball's chance in Hades, making his announcement yesterday. He and George Pataki, you've got to be wondering, have these guys been smoking something? They are nowhere, unless, of course, a giant, they're not included in the first debate, and a giant meteor comes streaking through the sky, crashes through the building, and it takes out everybody else. Maybe then they'll have a chance at the nomination. Sometimes they must be looking at the situation and wearing some sort of goggles, and they're not quite seeing it clearly. Also coming up, we have some folks who I believe are going to drop by today. There was a postponement in their arrival last week, talking about an event coming up this weekend that'll take place, I believe, starting Friday night. That'll take place at City Park, called Battle of the Bands. And they'll be coming in, spending a few minutes with us just to tell us what that's about, shortly, in fact, during the next segment of the program. We have a lot more to talk about during the course of the show today, but could I start out by mentioning all of this argument going on in Washington about the NSA and authorizing some of its spying programs, and the Patriot Act, which has been in place since shortly after the 9/11 attacks on this country, which at the time, we thought, my gosh, this is going to be a serious matter. We're in for the fight of our lives, and there was a huge rush. A lot of politicians got on board with this because they didn't want to be accused of being out to lunch when it came to the security and safety of the American people. So this bill was passed, but there are some arguments now that say no one ever expected some of the overreach from the National Security Agency that ended up coming along with this. Now, there has been a joke going on since midnight Sunday that the NSA is no longer monitoring all of your, going through all of your emails and your telephone calls and the like through its data collection processes. And you know what? It may well be true, but I have a funny feeling that some of these large government agencies tend to sometimes overlook the rules. So before you get too excited about the fact you might be able to call your auntie over in St. Louis and have a nice long conversation without somebody collecting all of the details on that. Now, listening in, no, not likely. There's so much transmission going on in this country every day. They can't have a staff that large. But as Hannity mentioned, I was listening to his program yesterday while driving home. As he was mentioning, he pointed out, he said something along the lines or to the effect of, it's all being stored in Utah. There's a center there. Now, Wired Magazine, which is a computer dedicated to computers and modern technology, did a cover story about this 2 years ago in April. And this massive building that is collecting all of this data on fellow Americans, although they say, well, they're not really the target. And then you get back into that argument, which always says, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, then you have nothing to worry about. That was a common argument, too, as well in 1930s Germany. And it didn't get them a whole heck of a lot out of that particular, what you'd call spying operation either. The result was catastrophic. Over at the Washington Examiner, which is a fairly conservative, sometimes libertarian publication, it is staffed by a lot of the people who work for National Review, which was founded by the conservative William F. Buckley. Over at Washington Examiner, I saw a couple of pieces this morning that I think are relatable to this. And that, in fact, an editorial says, since Sunday at midnight, the NSA has ceased keeping track of the phone numbers you call and where you are when your conversations take place. This is happening in a lot of countries. There was a fellow in Germany, and he managed to unearth this. He had to fight like tooth and nail to get the records, but he was on a train trip. And he discovered that in the course of his train trip that he'd been pinged 600 times by the government agencies. Well, of course, when you're driving along, there are all these cell towers, but that they had a record of wherever he was going past because of that. It's shocking what they can know. Now, the writer at Washington Examiner says, do you feel less safe that the data collection stopped on Sunday night? No one has explained satisfactorily, the writer says, why you or anyone should. When the USA Patriot Act passed, no one, including its staunchest supporters, envisioned or discussed a blank warrant system of indiscriminate government snooping on citizens. The NSA's program supporters have failed to approach the burden of proof that would justify any weighing of this program based on trade-offs between security and liberty. When the program was first exposed, the intelligence community rushed forward with a sloppy claim that it had prevented as many as 54 attacks. Officials then proceeded to walk back this claim as it fell apart under scrutiny. Well, of course, they wanted to make sure that they could play CYA, but it wasn't going to work. And when they discovered that, now they're just sort of fumbling around. And again, no one has come up with a satisfactory answer as to why they need to do all of this. Ken Cuccinelli, who was almost the governor of Virginia, he lost a very close election there a couple of years ago. He was one of the first people in America to file a lawsuit against Obamacare when he was serving as Virginia's Attorney General. And he ended up losing to the old Clinton consigliere guy by the name of Terry McAuliffe, who's about as sleazy as you will ever get in American politics, because the Washington Post openly campaigned for McAuliffe. And in Northern Virginia, where the Post still has a large footprint, that's where most of the votes are. But Cuccinelli managed to close down to within a few thousand votes before losing that election a couple of years ago, even with all of the liberal machinery that was arrayed against him. He also has a piece today at Washington Examiner. The debate surrounding the sunset section of, that's Section 215, by the way, we should point out, of the Patriot Act, is a historic moment for the Fourth Amendment, which protects Americans from unreasonable searches and seizures of their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Now, Cuccinelli, Attorney General at one time in his state, very much a constitutional expert when it comes to the law, and a Republican, we should point out. This is what's been most interesting about this. Amy Goodman, who's about as far left as you can get, she hosts a radio program that's also broadcast on some TV and cable systems, and you can also pick it up online. She is against this particular portion of the act. So people say, well, we can't get anyone to get along in government anymore. We need to have more cooperation. Well, you're getting it now, because you've got people on the far right and people on the far left who are saying this is a bad, bad idea. And so Cuccinelli says there's no reason to trust your government when they say trust us, and he cites the Benghazi attack, when the Obama White House claimed it was a film that inspired these people to go kill 4 Americans. And of course, that was an outright lie in order to protect his reelection efforts. So you have all of these details, and he lists several of these other cases where the government was saying one thing, but it was doing another. And he says, from that standpoint, you cannot trust people who openly lie to you. We have a caller with us. It's 814. It's 61 right now at our studios. This is Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as online at newsradio1310.com. And you're on the air.
Bill, thank you. I finally seen the light. Thank you, my man. I don't know how I went so far, not seeing the about yesterday, about the gays. You're right. You know what? They want their own little, their thing. That's why let's get rid of them, like Dennis Hastert, Mark Foley. Let's get rid of them. That's what I say. How
about Bill Clinton and that island that he went to that his buddy from Britain had? That was down in the Virgin Islands where Bill Clinton would go, and they would have sex with all of these underage girls. I'm sure that the left is all concerned about that too, as well. That is again, the story got reported and then it got dropped by all of his sympathizers in media. In other words, 99% of the folks working in television, newspapers, magazines, etc. Right? So there you go. But you know what? He said he's seen the light. So obviously, he's one of these people who thinks that we should just have open the doors to everybody because, of course, who needs any rules in life anymore? And you're up next. You're on the air. It's 8:15. Oh. Tell you what, let's try this button. All right, you're welcome. Thank you for holding on during that particular what we call faux pas. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Yes.
This is Pat. And, I think, is it Snowden, the boy that let us know about what was going on? I still think he's probably a hero because we would not be at this point fighting this program if it hadn't been for him bringing it out.
And he's hiding out in some embassy in England right now. And I understand that if he comes out and he gets captured, that he is going to be tried in a secret court in this country. So the notion that the United States would have a star chamber is just ridiculous. But here you go. It appears that we are operating under some sort of medieval system in order to protect. Folks, why do we even have a constitution then? I thank you, Pat, for the call. Why do we even have a constitution? Did he break the law technically by doing what he did? Sure he did. But sometimes when you call attention to the fact that, you know what, there were probably a few people in Nazi Germany who should have said, hey, wait a minute, do you know what they're really up to? But it didn't very often happen. You're up next with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's on your mind?
I just, when Jill left, I thought her boyfriend would quit calling in, but
You know, as much as he acts like he hates you, I think he likes you because he listens every single day, Bill.
Well, moths fly close to flames. When they see the light, they can't help themselves.
Yes, sir. All right. Keep up the good work.
I thank you. Yeah, the insects of the world, they don't really think very clearly. They just have some sort of reaction whenever they see some sort of light, and they're attracted to it. And they don't know why, but they are. And maybe someday that will actually lead to some sort of, how shall we put this, epiphany on their part. But I don't hold out hope for some of them. But at least, we can pray and do all of those things. Sean Hannity last night speaking on television to Rand Paul, the man who is probably right now the most hated by what I would call the neoconservatives in this country and the people who actually believe that we should be running roughshod over the public. Take a listen to the conversation between these two men last night. They happen to be talking about this. I'll tell you what, some people probably are angry about Paul in this situation, but I think that at least what he's done, let's face it, he's taking a lot of heat. I have a lot of respect for the man.
This controversial Section 215 was not what the Patriot Act allowed for, but yet our electronic communications have been taken without consideration of civil liberties. Is that your biggest concern?
Yes. The other concern is that this is illegal. The court has said it's illegal, and yet President Obama continues to collect these records despite the court telling him that it's illegal. And it's funny how you get this deflection from the president. The president always wants to blame somebody else. So right now he's blaming us in Congress for not doing what needs to be done. But the whole program started with the president and is in defiance of what Congress said. So you're right, the Patriot Act does not allow for this collection of illegal records, and yet the president's doing it anyway. So the good success that will come out of this week, and I hope this will be a success in the sense that I've spent a lot of time talking about this, is that from now on the president will not be allowed to collect any records and store them in the form of a general warrant. It would have to be individualized, and it'll have to go through the phone companies.
Are you going to support the USA Freedom Act, which would then allow the phone companies to store the data, and then it would take a court order to get this information that they then have stored? Is that acceptable to you?
I support the Freedom Act in ending the bulk collection of the government records. I am still a little bit fearful that we may be replacing bulk collection by the government with bulk collection and searching at the phone companies. I would like it to be completely individualized, where when we look at phone records, we look at the phone records of terrorists, but we don't look at the phone records of large groups of people. The USA Freedom Act will still allow a corporation to be searched, and if that corporation were Verizon or AT&T, we might be right back where we started.
Some great points. And by the way, the caller referred to as Jill's boyfriend by many of the other callers, he does bring up a great point. Men who have been given too much power, no matter what their political background, often behave very, very badly. Think about that for a moment. And yet some people out there think we should allow the government to continue snooping. I think he's made the point inadvertently. We've got a guest coming up in a few minutes talking about a very good event this weekend at City Park called Battle of the Bands. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. It's 8:20 and 61. There's an event coming up this Friday taking place at City Park in Twin Falls. And you may have already heard about it. They have a Facebook page set up. It's called Battle of the Bands. And it's going to be a very intense evening. It's only for one day, though, so you wouldn't want to miss it. I am joined in the studio. I'm going to make sure his microphone is open. Josh Jensen is joining us. Welcome, first of all.
Hey, thank you. Good to be here.
So this Battle of the Bands, I guess there's an opportunity for people to come hear them, but what, is it going to be some sort of vote at the end of all of this, too?
Right. So the winner actually gets $1,000, which is amazing. And each band plays for 20 minutes. But then when it comes to the voting, there's 5 judges, but they only count for 50% of the vote. And then the audience will count for the other 50%. So every person's going to be able to vote at least once for their favorite band. Then we put it all together, and the winner gets $1,000.
This is a great promotion for all of the bands involved.
Totally. And that's really what we're looking for. We wanted this to be a community event. And all 8 of the bands, they're all local talent from the Magic Valley. And we want people to be able to hear these bands and realize how good they are in Twin Falls.
Now, 35 year ago, I used to be able to go out with my friends on weekends, and you could go to any local bowling alley or some of the little social clubs always had bands playing. And then it seems that what happened, there was a period in time, maybe it was the rise of video games and other things for people's attention, but we seem to have a drop-off in interest but now there seems to be some sort of revival going on.
You know, I would say definitely, and I know this just because I'm 30 right now, and I feel like I've seen younger people not want to get out as much, be able to listen to new music, that type of a deal. But with our event, I will say there's a great turnout every year. So maybe it's partly due to a revival that you're talking about, with people wanting to go back out and listen to live music again, be able to do different things like that.
In fact, a lot of people who perform in local bands, sometimes this works out so well that it becomes their main source of earning a living, or at least it's a great supplemental way to earn a living. And you hear some great music. You know, there's a lot of truth to this. I saw the movie The Commitments about 20 years ago. Sometimes you can have a great band and they just don't get a break.
Right.
And so they don't become, world famous or nationally famous. But on the other hand, there's some tremendous talent that's still out there, even on the local level.
Right. There really is. And I'm just telling you, man, we've done this. This is our 4th year now. This is our second actual back-to-back year of doing Battle of the Bands. And the talent that we saw come in this year, it has shocked me. Because, a lot of people think around this area, can there really be that much talent? There really is. And they're all so diversified with their music. The 8 bands that you're going to hear at this thing, they're all so different. If you don't like one, you'll probably like the other 7, because they're just not the same, but they're pretty phenomenal in terms of how good they are.
It doesn't really matter then if you win or not, because somebody's going to remember who you are, and then they're going to see perhaps on a marquee you're playing somewhere in the area and just might drop in.
Exactly. And I will say this too. It's funny. Most of the bands, they obviously would love to win the prize, right? Who wouldn't want to win $1,000? But all of them say, even if we don't win, this is more people than we've ever played in front of. And more importantly, we just love to be a part of this thing, and we get to meet some of these people. And that's really what we're in this thing for. So,
you're a musician yourself, I take it.
I play the bass guitar. I'm not super great, but I've played the bass guitar for about 10 years now, and I love music as a whole. And so that's one of the reasons why I put this thing on to begin with. But I can't necessarily say that I'm really, really good. I just really like to hear good people play their instruments.
I had a stepfather who was, I'll call him a very... who's an individual who I guess showed a lot of humility, because he always said he was just a bass player, but he said he always wanted to be a lead guitarist, but didn't feel like he quite qualified to do that. But on the other hand, he ended up playing in Fabian's backup band in the 1950s for a while. So
wow,
they must have been doing something right.
Right.
But he never much bragged about it. The only thing that you would have known when you walked into the house, there was a photograph of the band when they were all young and they still had hair.
Right.
But that would have been the only reason you ever knew that he'd performed in a band. And then just for fun, in later years, he ended up being a bass player in a country band, which was quite a change from the old rock and roll era.
Right.
But he just loved that atmosphere of being up there on stage playing with friends.
Totally. That's great. Well, and the fact that he was super humble about it, didn't say a whole lot, that's a cool deal too. I'll say this, for the tryouts for our event for Battle of the Bands, some of the guys who come in, they're so self-depreciating that you're thinking, well, okay, maybe they're not going to be that good. And then when they get on their instrument, you're just thinking, oh my gosh, they're just humble people, but they're pretty phenomenal at their instrument. So
I was going to say, the reputation musicians often get, it may come from, let's face it, if the quiet ones, people don't realize that. The attention all goes to those who smash guitars and
right.
wreck hotel rooms. But for most people, that's not what it's about.
That's exactly right. Right. The couple bad apples give a lot of musicians a bad rap. But the reality is there's so many just good people out there, and good dudes and good musicians who just love music. And they're very nice, genuine people.
Quickly, what time do you start?
We start at 5 o'clock. The Barking Owls, who were in this thing last year, they're not part of this competition, but they're going to kick it off just by playing for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to start with the actual show from there. So,
all right. Look forward to it. As I was telling Josh, I get to hear it from where I live, but I may actually walk over. It's going to be a beautiful night anyway, according to the weather forecast, for a change. It's 61, 8:30. Josh Jensen joining us in studio, talking about the Battle of the Bands. Steve Millington is coming up next. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. As well as newsradio1310.com. Steve Millington joins us in studio this half hour. He is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. He comes by and chats with us, gives us some insight into how sometimes, what do they call it, making sausage when it comes to politics? Is that it's kind of like that, isn't it?
sometimes I think that's just exactly what. Best that we don't know what goes on.
It's 8:34, and it's 60. I'm reading this through my bifocals, so 61. I've been wearing bifocals, Steve, for 5 years, and I'm still not used to them.
Well, yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
And I don't think that gets much better as time goes by.
It makes eating practically impossible, but that's a story for another day.
I need to have, my arms need to be about 3 or 4 inches longer. Otherwise, I can't read a thing.
Mine are long enough. It's just that I've gotten so big in the center that trying to get them out there is...
I'm not going there, Bill.
News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story with Bill Colley on what is turning out to be a very nice warm morning.
Nice.
First of all, we had an announcement for Lindsey Graham yesterday, George Pataki the other day. I'll tell you what, these guys, they may be nice fellows, but I can't see them getting much traction.
You know, I keep asking myself, why? Well, follow the money. I don't know how they... The campaign laws and the campaign financing laws is what the word I think I want to find. I don't understand exactly how all that works, but I get the feeling in the back of my mind that we can put together a presidential campaign, and if that were unsuccessful, but we round up $10-15 million, we can transfer that back to either our other political campaigns, in the case of Lindsey Graham running for United States Senate again from South Carolina, or in Pataki's case, he's not running for political office again, but it becomes a war chest that they can use to kind of feather their own bed. One other thing that I find interesting, so I'm a candidate for president. I didn't make the final cut, but now I'm on the speaking circuit at $50,000 to $100,000 a shot. Well, this is called advertising.
Harold Stassen, who ran for president about 10 times.
Many times.
I remember talking to a lawyer who met him when she was young and said that Stassen did this primarily because his clients overseas heard that he had been a presidential candidate a number of times. They didn't realize he had a snowball's chance in Hades of winning. But it enhanced his law practice, and it made him more money.
Exactly. And I think to a large extent, that's what many of these people are doing. They're playing on the advertising point or the publicity point, and let's get real. If we're looking for somebody to come be a guest speaker at some big convention we're hosting, and the name pops up, and we say, "Well, I remember that name. They ran for president."
Now, I'm gonna throw my own 2 cents in on this one, because some of these people, I think, are gambling that people outside their own states don't know much about them. And in Pataki's case, he won on one platform. He knocked off Mario Cuomo, which was considered a big feat at the time.
That's right.
But he did it by saying that he would work to restore the death penalty. So he did sign the bill. I was in the room when he signed the bill, making it law, but then no one was ever executed after that. The law got tossed out. They never brought it back. I flew on a helicopter with him one time over a disaster scene after a big storm. And because we had the longest legs in the helicopter, we got the outside seats, which was comfortable. But I saw him work with the people who'd been affected. We went into these small towns where schools had been demolished and homes demolished, and he had a really nice personal touch. But I've got to tell you, other than that, he campaigned as a conservative, but he served 3 terms as a liberal, and I don't think people outside of New York State know that.
Have ever recognized. There's an R behind his name. Therefore, he's a Republican. Now, we have a little acronym out here called a RHINO, Republican in name only. But and so he may in fact qualify in that category. But the thing that's so fascinating is that they just seem to be proliferating all over everywhere. Where are these guys coming from?
Some of them I don't think will make it to Iowa. I really don't. Or they won't make it beyond Iowa.
Yeah, that'll be the end of that. Yeah, you're right.
I just heard yesterday, though, where some people are now saying that Carson, who looked like a long shot, has been doing such a good job. He reads the American people very, very well.
Exactly.
That he may be one of the early surprises.
In a recent article that I read, they said that originally Ben Carson was not even on the short list of who gets to come to the debate. And now they're discovering that he is consistently running in the top 5 candidates. And so they have bumped a lot of them off the page and moved him up into that category. I think there's a lot of people who look around and say, what's wrong with this guy? Yeah, maybe he hasn't been there before. Maybe that's a good thing. Let's see what he can do.
When you have conjoined twins and you have their brains cut open doing surgery, that tells you right now that this is a guy with steely nerves.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what we need in a leadership role.
And a very steady, solid hand.
Yeah, and you look at the guy and he seems like a school teacher with his laid-back style, but there's got to be some toughness there.
Yeah, just inside he is just absolutely steel.
We've got a break coming up, but hey, I've got to ask you in the next segment too about Raul Labrador getting on board with the Paul campaign. We had Mr. Labrador, Congressman Labrador, on the show the other day, and it was interesting. He was saying that he sees eye to eye with Paul on the Constitution, but he kept pointing out that there's a few other candidates he really likes too as well, which means if it doesn't come out in the wash a particular way, he's still going to be on board with somebody. We've got details on that coming up. Steve Millington, Twin Falls County Republican Chairman, in studio with us, with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. It's 8:40 and 61. Our guest in the studio, Steve Millington, is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. He spends some time with us on Tuesday mornings, and we review just some political goings-on. Hey, during the break, you mentioned we have a vacancy in the state legislature that's going to be filled soon.
Yes, we do, and it's really important to the Magic Valley area because of the prominence of this particular person. Senator Dean Cameron, who represents Legislative District 27, which is Minidoka and Cassia County, has been appointed to head the Department of Insurance. And so he will vacate his Senate seat and take over the Department of Insurance, I think it's mid-June. So what happens now to fill his empty seat? The precinct committee people in District 27 will meet. I think they're required to meet within 15 days of his letter of resignation. And then they will vote and come up with 3 names that they can send to the governor. And normally you have 3 distinct rounds of voting. You have round 1, and you have select an individual. That would be your first choice. Then you have round 2, and that would be your second choice. And then round 3, and that would be your third choice. And you send those names to the governor in that specific order. First choice, second, third. There's lots of names being popped up about who would run to fill Dean Cameron's seat. There is another interesting thing here that is really overlooked, I think, or not given as much emphasis as it should. Dean Cameron is co-chair of the JFAC Committee, Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. And the reason we say joint chair is that particular committee, because of its importance and its prominence in budget setting, has a Senate co-chair and a House co-chair. And so and it's one of the largest committees in the legislative arena. They have 25 or so members on the committee between the House and Senate. Well, we have been extremely fortunate in the Magic Valley. One of the co-chairs from the House side is Maxine Bell from Jerome. The other one is Dean Cameron from Rupert. And so we have those 2 individuals who control the purse strings for the Idaho budget. Well, I shouldn't say control, but the greatest influence on those, both residing in Magic Valley. That gives us quite a bit of prominence and input into how the legislative process or the financial budgetary process is completed. Well, you get to looking at the other people on the Senate Finance Committee. Dean Cameron is the only one from our area on the Senate side. And so you look at it and you say, well, who could we end up with? Well, it won't be anybody from the Magic Valley. And so one of the things we will discover very quickly is that and he's been very helpful in a lot of ways. College of Southern Idaho is one item that always requires a lot of state funding, and the constituency there is a little bit broader based. Cameron has been a great supporter of CSI, as he is, in so many things, but he's always been kind of our guy. And we're going to lose him. And that's the fact that he's going to exit from the JFAC committee is really going to, we won't see it probably in the immediate, but you take a longer term perspective, 3 or 4 years, we're going to miss him in the JFAC committee. No question about it. The other thing that's kind of critical is that Maxine Bell, she has a great sense, a great feel for putting that budget together and where's the money coming from, and we have enough, and who wants the money here, and what about this proposal over there, and I've got to find this much money for education, and then this much for health and welfare, and she's very, very keen, very astute at following those kinds of items. So we better hope that she hangs around for a long time. But we're going to miss Dean Cameron because he has been able to do an awful lot of really good stuff for the state, but especially for the Magic Valley. We're going to miss him when he goes away.
Our guest, Steve Millington, is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 8:48, 62 now at News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well, and you can reach our program by giving us a shout at 736-0300. I talked to a very nice young lady in the office of Congressman Raul Labrador the other day, and she said that when she was in college, your son and the young woman and your son ran the college Republican Club.
That's correct.
And so we had a nice conversation. She lined up Congressman Labrador on the air the other day to talk about his new role as the regional campaign manager for Rand Paul presidential campaign.
Correct.
And I thought it was interesting when Labrador said, well, I'm on board because Paul and I see eye to eye on the Constitution. But then he qualified that by saying, but there are some others, a handful of others that I think would make very good candidates if Mr. Paul decides in the long run or doesn't come out on top. We didn't get into specifics about who those might be, but I know it's likely a short list of 3 or 4 people.
I believe you're right. And at the present time, it's way early in the process here. But let's keep in mind, we've got a dozen of these people, and I think before we're done, we're going to have 15 or 16 of them as a minimum.
Labrador, when asked if he would be possibly a vice presidential candidate or a cabinet member, said he would not turn it down. But he said because of Idaho's size, we only have the 4 electoral votes. It's not likely anyone would ask an Idahoan to run.
Right.
But it's not as if you're just asking a typical congressman to run as vice president. Raul Labrador, his family comes from Puerto Rico.
Hispanic.
And he's fluent in the language, too, as well. He has great ties to the Tea Party movement.
Yes, he does.
So he is, and he's young. And so that notion that you would have Paul and Labrador on a ticket really could capture a lot of I think, that youth vote. And it could really help the Republicans out when it can, because if Cruz is not the nominee or Rubio's not the nominee, then they're still going to be looking for that Latin impact.
That's right. The person who can go out and reach that Latin Hispanic population, and Labrador is one of these fellows who could very comfortably go into a speaking engagement and handle the entire meeting in Spanish, because that was his native tongue, and English frankly is kind of his second language, if you will. So he could handle that very, very comfortably. And he has there's an awful lot of tracking that he can do in the Western United States, especially I don't know about the California, Oregon, Washington. We don't call them Western United States. They're way out somewhere. I don't know.
Yes.
But
coastal.
Yeah, coastal.
Left coast.
We'll call that coastal. But you look at the interior section from Colorado to Nevada, from Montana to Arizona, New Mexico. Labrador is the kind of individual who could have a real good focus and a real good relationship with a lot of voters in that block of 10 to 12 states.
Could this help him bury the hatchet perhaps with Mike Simpson, because it's gone public. They're not being very nice to each other.
They're not. They have a lot of conflict. I don't know that. Yeah, well, it is kind of ideological, and Labrador would kind of like Simpson to be a little bit more leaning to the right, but Simpson has not failed us in the state. In fact, he's taken on the EPA right now because the EPA is going stupid on water control. And I'm here to tell you, but if Idaho doesn't have all its water, we're done. And so this idea that we're going to let the EPA stick their nose into our water issues is a screaming joke. Well, it ain't a joke. It's a
this morning, Richard Rahn, who was a columnist at Washington Times, and if I recall the history, he was married to Peggy Noonan at one time, and he one time was head of the Chamber of Commerce nationwide. Mm-hmm. He says that even a lot of Democrats are starting to realize the economy is not picking up, and we're not seeing growth because of overregulation by EPA and a lot of these other acronyms out of Washington.
Right on. And it's simply not working. Labrador is going to speak to, we've had enough big government. Let's shrink the size of government. Let's get all this big government stuff out of our life and out of our way so we can get on with the process of providing a living for our families, for ourselves, and contributing to our communities. And that's going to speak well to a lot of people.
Now, you'll be going, I guess, to Idaho Falls this Friday?
Yep. We have it's called the State Central Committee meeting. And it convenes in Idaho Falls at noon on Friday and runs through about 5 or 6 o'clock Saturday afternoon.
And this is an opportunity for Rubio to really strut his stuff.
He's going to be the keynote speaker at the Friday night banquet. They have the VIP social hour from 5:30 to 6:30. The formal banquet dinner begins at 6:30 and runs until whenever they get done talking. And that's going to be held at the Shiloh Inn in Idaho Falls. Tickets are available at idgop.org. I apologize. My phone's out in the pickup truck. Don't bring it in here because it always rings when you're on the air. There's a phone number you can call to get tickets, but if you go to idgop.org, there's a link there that you can just hook on and get tickets. Should be real interesting. Now, here's an aside for you, okay? Goes back to Labrador and Rand Paul. Rand Paul was the keynote speaker at the biennial convention in 2014 in Moscow, Idaho. So you had Paul and Labrador connecting up there at that situation, and not the first time and not the only time, but so the connection between Labrador and Rand Paul, it goes back quite a long ways.
One thing that I don't know, usually charismatic people are really fiery speakers. Labrador comes across as being almost professorial. He's not loud, but I was told by his office when he holds a town hall meeting, sometimes hundreds of people will show up.
They fill the house. I have been in situations where he has been a town hall speaker, like over in the Nampa, Caldwell, Owyhee County, Homedale area. They'll say, Congressman Labrador is going to be here on this day. They can't find a place big enough. They have to move it to the gymnasium at the high school because they just fill up the place. And he is comfortable working the crowd. You give him a microphone, a handheld microphone, and he'll walk back and forth and talk to people and engage. And he has a real good presence. I can see where he would be a real intimidating person in a courtroom because he can take control of the situation of the audience and just very casually, not with so much fire and brimstone, but in a very consistent and folksy kind of way, just get his message across to the people, and it sticks. It doesn't just float off tomorrow.
The last time I saw that many people at a town hall meeting, when Mike Castle was a congressman from Delaware, he had a town hall meeting, and he came, and 300 people showed up, booed him, shouted him down, called him names, and it was the beginning of the end of his political career.
Whoa.
And up till that point, he'd only ever seen maybe a dozen people or so.
At any one time.
But I greeted him outside with a sign. He had just voted for some law to basically dismantle American industry, and I was outside with a sign that said, "China thanks Mike Castle." And he spoke to me politely that day, but he never spoke to me again afterward.
Not ever. Okay, well.
Apparently, I made him angry.
Well, no doubt that you would make somebody. Yeah, I could see where you would be able to do that real comfortably, Bill. It'll be interesting to see how Rand Paul holds up as we sort this thing out. He's got a lot of notoriety, a lot of publicity. off of this attack of the
Patriot
Act.
Right.
And I listen to his arguments and I say to myself, that's how we lose all of our liberties. The idea behind the Patriot Act in 2001 was we have to have a way to monitor, to find these people who mean to do bad things to America. The unintended consequences were that some bureaucrat reached across the line. And so from that standpoint, we need to learn how to shut these people down to protect our liberties. There's a fine line between intelligence gathering and the destruction of our liberties. And from that standpoint, I look at Rand Paul and I say, hang in there, buddy. That we just need one more major terrorist attack, and everybody's going to say, to heck with my liberties, I want my safety.
That's a choice people will be asked to make.
Yes, we will.
Point. Steve Millington, want to thank you. We'll see you again. You can give us an update about the event in Marco Rubio next week.
We'll be here to talk about it.
All right, 8:59. News is coming up next from Fox. One more hour of top story ahead as well at 61. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Healthcare costs may be going up in a lot of the parts of the country next year due to something called the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare. Something I want to quickly share with people this morning. We won't spend maybe a lot of time on this, although I guess it depends on perhaps reaction to it. The Daily Signal has this headline today: how affordable will health insurance be in 2016? Now, this is mainly going to affect, I think, those states where they have set up their own state health exchanges. Albeit, we could see all of this come tumbling down anyway in a matter of a few days with a Supreme Court ruling, which is looking at these exchanges because the federal government, some of the wording was in the law, could end up getting the whole law tossed out because the federal government was not supposed to be working in tandem with states that were doing this. Melissa Quinn is the writer. Health insurance companies around the country are providing states with their proposed premium rates for 2016. And changes include rate hikes of up to 51% in places like New Mexico, 30% in Maryland and Tennessee, and then they go on to list several other states where they are going to see some other states too that will have insurance up around 50%. The increase is 50% for next year. And then this also, I highlighted this one line on page 2. By contrast, larger for-profit providers such as Aetna, priced more defensively, are either reducing their rates or increasing them slightly. Now, what's going on there? Why is that happening? Well, a couple of things. When you set up a healthcare exchange, the future of that exchange is dependent on the young people who are generally healthier signing up for insurance through the exchange. And in other words, they don't often get sick. They don't often go to the doctor. They might fall off a bike and break a leg, but that happens mainly to 71-year-old secretaries of state. They end up paying into the system, and that helps the insurance company or the exchange, which works like an insurance company. That helps them move forward, and the exchange is used, by the way, insurers, private insurers. That helps them move forward and hold costs down. But when you set up an exchange and it's mainly older people who sign up for it, and the younger people stay away in droves, figuring I'd rather pay the penalty because that's less, then those older folks, they do get sick more often. They do have to go to the doctor's office more often. They do need more medicines, and therefore the insurer is covering a lot of that and being forced to in many cases. So what you have with these healthcare exchanges, and of course, Lefty does not understand how business works. Lefty put all of this together and said, aha, we've solved the problem for America. We still have about 30 million uninsured, so it really hasn't made much of a dent in that population. We should point that out too as well. But here's the thing. If I owned a grocery store, this is like going to the grocery store and saying, okay, we want you to give your groceries away because, people out there are hungry. You can only do that for so long. If you've got no income coming in, eventually you can't pay the staff. You can't buy the groceries that are coming in to turn around and sell because you're giving them away. You have no money left for that. You can't pay the electric bill. You can't pay any other expenses that you have, and you go out of business. You are going to have people on the left screaming that these insurance companies are trying to gouge people. But they cannot give away their product because then you can't stay in business. Now, unless the left is really planning that, to put insurers, private insurers, out of business in hopes that they can then come back to the public and say, well, who knew that they had to make a profit in order to stay in business? Oh, what a surprise that is. So therefore, we are going to give you what is called a single-payer system, that is socialized national health care, which is bankrupting Japan and England and other places where it currently is in use. And in fact, in England, I have a friend by the name of Keith Gordon. Scottish name, but Keith grew up on the East End of London. Keith's mother was in a home in England, and Keith went back to visit her while she was living in this nursing facility, and had discovered at one point that they'd gone 3 days, someone had forgotten to give her water. And there's tremendous rationing of care going on there. Women are coming down with breast cancer in England, and because the system cannot handle all of the demands, the system is saying, well, tell you what, in 6 months we may be able to start treatment. You could be dead by then. Well, yeah, but we can't afford to start treatment today. So that's what's potentially the future here in the United States. Speaking of which, I happened to see this story in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. U.S. drug shortages frustrate doctors and patients. This is a lengthy story by the writer Peter Loftus. I highlighted it by saying page 10 is especially good. So I'm going to try to flip to page 10 and share with you what I actually was talking about. But some of the percentages that are impacting drug sales in this country and the shortages are just astronomical. Some of the thousands of patients who depend on BCG, which is a cancer-treating drug for bladder cancer, which is especially nasty. They have resorted to tracking online message boards, calling hospitals, and traveling hundreds of miles to find supplies. Some patients have gone without BCG, while others have received less effective alternatives. There are patients who aren't getting optimal therapy right now, says Dr. Edward Messing, a urologist at the University of Rochester Medical Center in Rochester, New York. The number of drugs in short supply, now this is what you really have to pay attention to, in short supply in the U.S. has risen 74% from 5 years ago to about 265, according to the University of Utah's Drug Information Service, which tracks supplies. They range from antibiotics and cancer treatments to commodity items such as saline. If you've ever worn contact lenses, you know that's an important thing to have around the house. Many of the scarce drugs are older, injectable treatments that can be complex and costly to manufacture, but which command relatively low prices because they aren't protected by patent. Companies can't easily increase prices because insurers reimburse many generic hospital-administered drugs under a payment system that is more frugal than for other medicines. So there you go again. Regulation and control is squeezing people out of developing these medicines or producing them. Why? Because your evil drug maker has to make a profit too as well. Funny how that profit thing is. You can't pay the bills and employ people when you aren't making it. Page 10. One last paragraph I want to highlight for you. How can that happen in this country? Asked Mr. Clifford, a retired buyer of men's clothing who splits his time between Plymouth, Mass. and Bonita Springs, Florida. We put people on the moon, for crying out loud, he asks. Now, he is a man who needs a particular drug, that BCG treatment, for bladder cancer, and he can't get it. How is this happening? Because you've got Democrats who believe that they can manage the system better than the system could manage itself. And this is what they have wrought. We have a country that has never recovered from the 2008 recession, and instead they gave us Obamacare. They went and they borrowed a lot of money from China, and they said, this is for shovel-ready projects. This will turn the economy around. Some of those projects weren't that shovel-ready. Some of that money went down the rat hole into campaign supporters' pockets as a reward for the campaign cash from the previous election cycle. So that didn't turn the economy around. And then they completely forgot it. They did it once, walked away from it after spending all that money that they borrowed, putting us all on the hook for it. And then these political nitwits turned around and said, well, we'll give you a health care system that we've always wanted to do, while the country was screaming out for a turnaround in the economy, which, as you know, contracted in the first quarter of 2015. Didn't grow. China contracted down to 7%, which is still historically high. The United States actually was below zero. It contracted that much. Now, I don't know about you, but somehow, somewhere, somebody has to start calling these people out. It doesn't happen much in media, so because of that, most people aren't even aware that this is going on until they can't get the drugs that they need. You know what? There is a guy by the name of Alan Grayson, big slimy fellow from the state of Florida, serves as a member of the House of Representatives. He's one of the big allies of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. He went on the Senate or House floor a few years ago and said the Republican plan for health care was die soon. That was a comment basically saying that that'll save us money. Well, I'll tell you what, that's exactly what's happening with Obamacare and what's going on in this country right now. So as it turns out, it's actually the Democrats' plan, die soon. Over at the Daily Signal again, a journalism school has challenged the media to get tougher on California's Obamacare exchange. In fact, this comes from the Columbia Journalism Review. Columbia Journalism, one of the top J schools in the country. A writer there says press coverage has largely followed the lead set by the covered California exchange. The result is coverage that has too often been reactive, short on enterprise, and with missed opportunities to ask some necessary questions. Covered California may ultimately have a success story to tell, but it will need to face some sharper skepticism before we can be sure. That comes from a journalism school. What's happening is the people at these J schools are suddenly realizing, you know what? We've gone around kissing the butt of Mr. Obama for so long, we've missed out on the fact that this is all a miserable failure. And if we started doing our jobs again, just perhaps, we might hold someone accountable and bring an end to all of this. Well, don't hold your breath. It's 9:17. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Now, in a lot of the states that didn't bother to set up exchanges, guess what? They don't have these problems. Those are the Republican-controlled states, the ones known as red states in this country. We don't have those problems. I've said it before. If you want a solution to the healthcare problem in this country, then all you have to do is go forward and you go out and you say to people, we're going to reinstate what were called the indemnity plans. These are the plans that we had in the 1950s and the 1960s. Yes, you had to pay some out-of-pocket expenses when you went to the doctor's office. You had insurance for catastrophic illness. That's what you have insurance for. What we've got a system in place now, and I brought this comparison up the other day. If you take your automobile to get an oil change, your car insurer does not pay for that. You pay for that. That's how that works. Your automobile insurance is there in case someone runs into you at an intersection, if you've got problems like that. But if you blow a rod or something like that, that's your own responsibility. And see, this is what we've lost sight of when it comes to health insurance. We also need competition. We need to have insurers that can sell products and plans across state lines, which just simply isn't happening in a lot of places. So what they've done is they've just taken the free market out of this completely, claiming that they'll make things better, and it's all just a mash. I know this is a lot to perhaps in a period of 15 minutes on a morning drive or whatever else you happen to be doing today to sort of take in and say, you know what, there's probably a simple solution to this. Yes, there is. And that is to go back to that system that was in place and worked so well in this country 50 years ago. But people have to take that leap of faith and realize government cannot solve all of their problems. That in fact, the old line from Ronald Reagan, it's not the solution, it is the problem. You know, and we have to recognize that, and we have to be willing to say, you know what, next time I have the sniffles, I'll pay the doctor for the cough medicine when I go to his office. And I won't expect that somebody else is going to pick up a part of the tab. That's what got us into this in the first place. I hate to say it, but it's a lack of personal responsibility that has become a hallmark of this country and the cultural changes we have seen that have happened here over the course of the last half century. Coming up on 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Hey, quickly, tomorrow morning, I do want to remind you too, Dr. Jonathan Tripp and perhaps some of his associates will be here from Tripp Family Medicine, which is located here in Twin Falls. They are located on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office. And of course, they have a great slogan, life's too short not to feel good. There's a guy who knows a little bit about healthcare or the like. And his general advice is, tell you what, prevention. We talk about those types of things on Wednesdays when he's in studio. We'll be talking with him again tomorrow between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. That's Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine on Top Story. And when the doctor is in or any of his associates, please feel free to give us a call. you'll be able to at least get pointed in the right direction when it comes to medical advice. I was racing home yesterday afternoon. I had been out doing a little shopping, and I was driving and listening to Sean Hannity when all of a sudden I heard the and this is a message from the National Weather Service in Boise, and warning me that we could have severe thunderstorms in the area. And I looked at the sky and thought, yeah, it does look that way. So I had the windows all open at home because, well, it was a hot day. Now, if I had tint in those windows, perhaps I could keep them closed and keep out a lot of that heat that comes through those windows from the sun. Aha. Well, I had to race home, of course, cut my shopping excursion short. But if I'd had tints, I wouldn't have had to do that. In fact, you need to realize the sun is a great bleaching agent, and it comes through your windows too as well, and it impacts colors in your home, your drapes, your furniture, your carpet. So we're recommending that you give Tint Lady a call. In fact, give them a call. Telephone number 736-8469. They are online as well. TintLadyIdaho.com. Over 20 years experience. Don't squint, get tint. Located at 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. Hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Now you can go Saturday by appointment. The shop is closed on Sundays. But they do tint for not only your home, but they do them for businesses. A lot of businesses around here like to have the big, airy, open windows. Just a lot of space dedicated to windows, which is fine. But you might want to have a tint in there, and that'll keep your office a little cooler. You could have up to 72% heat reduction, which is going to save you on the air conditioning bill this coming summer when the temperatures start hitting those triple-digit marks. I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon or this morning. Feels kind of like afternoon for those of us who get up at 4 o'clock. 9:25, 62 right now at our studios. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Do some of you know the name Tammy Bruce? Tammy Bruce has a radio show. She's a conservative talk show host. She's a regular talking head on the Fox News channel. She's written some books, very successful books. She has a column at Washington Times. We have been on this topic for the last couple of months on this program, something called the TPP. This is the trade deal that was worked out for President Obama, giving him all sorts of sweeping powers to make decisions. Tammy Bruce, she is what you'd call a very traditional conservative. You would not necessarily see her at a John Birch meeting. You would not necessarily see her really at many Tea Party events. I think she was a strong supporter of President Bush, who was a different brand of conservative, more of a capitalist, really, than he was a conservative. Tammy Bruce's column, though, she said even though she doesn't consider herself to be a conspiracy theorist, she's been looking at this Pacific trade deal. Recently passed in the GOP-controlled Senate, the Trans-Pacific Partnership has less to do with trade than it does with ushering in a globalist agenda that usurps American sovereignty. And again, this is coming from an establishment conservative. The keeping of the details of the agreement from Congress are actually stunning. So you had people, remember the old line about the health care bill? Nancy Pelosi said, we have to pass it so we can find out what's in it. Well, here you go again. You had Republicans involved this time who went along and passed it because somebody said, oh, it'll be good for us. Can we see what's in it? No, but it'll be good for us. So they went, and you had 2 U.S. senators from right here in Idaho who were behind that. This absurd secrecy alone should have made the TPP a non-starter, she writes. And then she goes down to a quote here from Julian Assange. First of all, it is the largest ever international economic treaty that has ever been negotiated, very considerably larger than NAFTA. It is mostly not about trade. Only 5 of the 29 chapters are about traditional trade, he said. Quote, the others are about regulating the internet and what information internet service providers have to collect. They have to hand it over to companies under certain circumstances. The regulation of labor conditions, regulating the way that you can favor local industry, regulating the hospital healthcare system, privatization of hospitals. So essentially every aspect of a modern economy, even banking services, are in the TPP, unquote, he concluded. Now, we don't know most of these details. People who voted for it don't know most of these details. She says, surprise, parts of this 1,000-page monstrosity perpetuates the regulation of the internet on a global scale. The method of using a treaty to accomplish this means the United States would be bound by it, and Congress would be unable to change it, just bureaucratic managers of the monster. How convenient for both parties to ultimately claim that they are as upset as we are, but alas, their hands are tied. So they may have had an inkling of what this was about. But by not knowing what was in there, now they can say, I had no idea. Who would have thunk that? I was just busily taking the campaign cash from Wall Street that was promoting it in G. Willikers. I didn't have time to read it. The same people who say, we voted for the Patriot Act because we thought it was a good idea, but we had no idea that they would be spying on everybody. No, gosh, you could have hit me over the head with a board. Maybe we should. Well, you just said something very nasty, so therefore we're going to spy on you. 9:30. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, which means you can listen to us online anywhere all over the country. Balmy 63 right now this morning. We hope to have more details on the weather coming up shortly, too, as well. It actually is going to be a great week. Even though there's no rain in the forecast, though, my experience has been that doesn't mean we won't see any, but there is no rain in the forecast for the immediate future. So if you have outdoor plans, go right to it. Oh, and coming up, Hillary Clinton planned a big fundraiser. They couldn't find enough people to show up. Ouch!